Hi, I'm Paige. Welcome back to my kitchen. You're watching the next episode of Doing It with Paigey. Now, today is a really exciting day because we are making our first loaf of sourdough so far in this series. We are going to be doing the Beginner Sourdough Recipe from the cookbook Bread Baking for Beginners by Bonnie Ohara. Now, this recipe is really similar to the kneaded boule recipe, so if you guys need a refresher on the techniques, I will leave that video right up here for you guys. Now, this recipe does require a little bit of planning. You'll need at least 24 hours in advance to kind of think through everything that you're going to need and get ready to do for this recipe. For starters, you're going to need a mature and active sourdough starter. Mine is right here. His name is Freddie Murphy. He's about 2 months old, so he is very sour, very mature, and very healthy. Now, if you need instructions on how to make a sourdough starter at home for the first time, I'll leave another video on how to make one right up here for you guys. So the first step in this recipe is to prepare your starter about 12 hours before you actually mix your dough. Now, what the book doesn't tell you is you'll actually need to feed your starter about 8 to 12 hours before that. You'll want to make sure that your starter is at peak activity when you prepare your starter before the bake. Peak activity with your sourdough starter usually happens anywhere between 6 and 12 hours after you feed it. I'll show you guys a little clip of what my sourdough starter looks like right after I fed it. As you can see here, it's at this very bottom line of the tape, but after about 12 hours after I fed it, it has risen well past the top of the tape line. It is doubled in size and it's really bubbly and fluffy. Another way to test if your starter is at peak activity is to do a float test. All you'll need to do is take a glass of warm water, spoon out a little bit of your sourdough starter, and drop it into the water. If it floats, that means it is ready to go. This is the best time to use your sourdough starter before you perform that first step. So hopefully that's not too confusing for you guys. I'm going to try to recap that. So about 18 to 24 hours before you prepare your starter, you'll want to make sure that your starter is fed and active. 12 hours before you start mixing your dough, that'll be the very first step, is to prepare your starter. I usually do that the night before I bake. So feed at the 24-hour mark before you bake and prepare at the 12-hour mark before you bake. So we're just gonna jump right in. I'm gonna show you guys what I did last night to prepare my starter for today's bake. I like to start off with a large bowl and weigh out my all-purpose flour, water, and mature starter. Now, I didn't show it here, but I would recommend weighing out your flour, water, and starter all in separate containers just in case you do accidentally pour too much of something into this large bowl. You'll combine these 3 ingredients into the large bowl and mix them up until everything is well combined. I found that using a rubber spatula is the best thing to use when mixing up my starter, so just make sure that you mix it all up until all of the clumps are out and everything is well combined. I'm going to cover this up loosely with a lid and we'll come back and check it in 12 hours. So after about 12 hours, here is what our mixture from last night looks like. As you can see, it's got lots of small air bubbles on the surface. It smells slightly sour, and we are ready to go ahead and add the other ingredients right on top of this. We'll start by weighing out our ingredients. Here I am weighing out my all-purpose flour, water, and salt in separate containers. Once these are weighed out, I'm going to add everything to the large bowl right on top of my starter mixture. And we're just going to jump right in and start mixing this all up by hand. I like to use my hand because it really allows me to feel when the dough is well combined. So you'll just jump right in, start squeezing the dough, mixing it all around, scraping up all of the dry ingredients from the bottom of the bowl, and just trying to combine everything the best that you can. A good way to tell when your dough is well mixed is to get it really stretchy like this. That's how you know everything is mixed well. Now we're gonna let our dough rest for about 30 minutes so that the flour can absorb some of that water, so we'll come back and check it in just a bit. All right, it's been about 30 minutes. Our dough is done resting and we are ready to go ahead and start kneading it. So I like to keep a small bowl of flour near me just so I can easily access that while I'm kneading. I'm going to start off by turning my dough out of the bowl onto a floured countertop, and we're going to jump right in and start kneading it. Now I'm going to start off by just adding a little bit more flour to the top of my dough. And in order to knead, we're just going to push forward with the heel of our hand, pull the dough back, give it a quarter turn, push forward, pull back, quarter turn. Now, as you get a little bit more familiar with that motion, you can kind of speed that up a little bit. So you can see I'm just kind of making that all one motion, push forward, pull back, and turn. Now we're going to do this for about 5 to 10 minutes until the dough has tightened up and isn't so loose and stretchy anymore. As my dough gets super stuck to the countertop like it is here, I'll just take my dough scraper, scrape it off the countertop, maybe add a little bit more flour, and just continue to knead it like I'm doing here. My dough is a little bit sticky. I kind of like to roll with the punches as long as I can. I don't really like to add too much flour to my dough. I feel like it dries it out. So I really just try to work with my dough until it gets almost unmanageable and it's really stuck to the countertops. And then I'll just add a little bit of flour at a time as I continue to work with it. Start to tell our dough is kind of starting to stay all in one ball as I'm kneading. It's more tight and not so loose. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pop this back into my bowl, and we're going to let this rise for 3 hours total. At the halfway mark, at about an hour and a half, we're going to come back and give it a set of folds. So I'll come back and check in with you guys then. All right, it's been about an hour and a half, and here is what our dough looks like. We're just gonna go around the dough, stretching and folding it to meet the other side to give our dough a little bit more strength. It's still looking a little bit loose and slack, so I'm probably gonna go around the dough 2 times. All right, now I'm gonna cover this back up and we'll come back and check it in another hour and a half. All right, here is what our dough looks like after a 3-hour rise. It's been about an hour and a half since we did that set of folds. As you can see here, we've got some really large bubbles on the surface. So I'm gonna take that as a really good sign, and we're gonna go ahead and get our loaves pre-shaped. I'm gonna start off by adding a little bit of flour to my countertops to make my dough a little bit easier to manage. I made the full recipe today, so I'll be dividing this into 2 equal pieces to make 2 loaves. Now, all you're gonna do is start from one side of your dough, and you're just gonna do a couple of letter folds. So we're gonna pull this down to meet the center. Start from the side closest to you and do the same thing. Same from my right. And same from the left. If your dough is still very slack like mine is here, feel free to give it another set of letter folds. Right, and I'm going to do the exact same thing to the other piece of dough. I'm gonna dust these lightly with a little bit of flour, and we're gonna let these bench rest for about 30 minutes, so I will come back and check on them then. All right, it's been about 30 minutes. Our dough is done bench resting, and here is what they look like. So I'm gonna go ahead and flip these over and give them their final shape. All right, we're gonna do that same set of letter folds, and we're just gonna start from the farthest side from us, fold this down to meet the center, the side closest to us, fold this up to meet the center, from my right, and from my left. Now I'm gonna turn this over, and I'm just gonna cut my hands underneath the dough and simultaneously turn it. So we're just trying to create some even tension across the top of our bread here. And we want to create tension across the top without tearing the top of the bread, so just keep that in mind. Now when you're finished shaping each loaf, we're going to turn these over into a well-floured proofing basket. We're going to have these sit seam side up. I'm going to be using the same shaping technique on this piece of dough. I'm just going to be giving it another set of letter folds, and then I'll turn this over and cut my hands underneath the dough while simultaneously turning it to create that even tension across the top of the dough. All right, I'm gonna cover each of our baskets up with a floured kitchen towel. We're gonna let these proof for about an hour to an hour and a half. We'll come back and check them in just a bit. While my dough is proofing, I'm gonna go ahead and preheat my oven as well as both of my Dutch ovens. Preheating your Dutch oven ensures that it's going to be really hot and has a little bit of steam in there for your bread to rise. So we'll come back and check on our loaves when they are done proofing. All right, it's been about 2 hours. Our dough is done proofing, and here is what it looks like. Now I'm gonna show you guys how you can tell that they're done. If you poke the dough and it leaves an indent, that means it is ready to go. If you poke it and it springs right back up, it needs a little bit more time, but these are looking good. So I'm gonna go ahead and score them and get them into the oven. So I'm gonna turn my dough out of the proofing basket onto this parchment paper. I've cut my parchment paper a little bit differently today so that it can drop into my Dutch oven a little bit nicer and not leave those little wrinkles around the sides of my loaves like it has in the past. So I'm going to score each of these loaves a little bit differently. For the first one, I think I'm just gonna keep it pretty simple and just do a straight line down the middle with a little design on the side. Now for the second piece of dough that I'm scoring, I'm gonna try something a little bit differently today. I'm gonna try to do a spiral. I have never tried this before, so please don't judge me. I have no idea how this is gonna turn out, so I guess we'll find out. Once both of our loaves are scored, we're gonna go ahead and pop these into our super hot Dutch ovens. I'm going to gently drop them into the Dutch ovens and cover them back up with the lid. We're gonna bake them for 25 minutes with the lid on, then we'll remove the lid and bake them for an additional 20 minutes so they can get a nice brown crust. My bread's been cooling on a wire rack for about an hour now. I think I'm ready to cut into those and do a taste test. I just want to show you guys how the scores turned out. So this one turned out terribly. I just don't know. I think the flower design is a little bit weird, but it's fine. You live, you learn. And I actually think this one turned out pretty cool. It's kind of like a spiral design. It turned out better than expected. We're gonna go ahead and cut into these and do a taste test. As I'm cutting into this, I can definitely see some large holes and a very open crumb, so I am very, very excited about that. That's something that I'm always looking to personally achieve when I make sourdough bread. Overall, I'm really happy with how this turned out, so I'm gonna go ahead and take a bite. Good. So the bread turned out so good. It has such a good flavor. It's slightly sweet but also sour, and I'm just really, really happy with how this turned out. I'm gonna give my dog a taste test because she's freaking out as soon as she saw me cut into this, so I'm gonna let her try it. This is Dutch. She loves bread. Is it good? I don't know if she's impressed or not. Overall, I think this is super similar to the kneaded boule recipe that I mentioned earlier. I'll try to link that again here for you guys. I think the only difference here is instead of adding that instant yeast, you're adding your sourdough starter, which just gives it an amazing flavor. This recipe is so good if you're trying to make a perfect sourdough. This is a great place to start if you're trying to work your way up to a really advanced sourdough recipe. With that being said, be sure to tune in next week because we are moving on to the intermediate sourdough recipe, and I'm so excited to try this one with you guys because it's a personal favorite of mine. Instead of kneading it, we'll actually be giving it folds so it stays in the bowl the entire time. It's a lot easier, so I'm really excited to try that one with you guys. Now, if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, be sure to subscribe, and thanks again for watching Dough It with Paige. I'll see you guys next time.